and welcome to this special edition of the Plympton Podcast, focusing on the planning application for a new Aldi store in the overflow car park of Chaplins in Plympton. The application was first considered at the March Planning Committee of Plymouth City Council, but was deferred for better information on highways impact and the impact on other shopping areas such as Ridgeway. The matter came back before the Planning Committee in August 2019. Case Officer Ali Wagstaff updated the committee members on the application.
The application site is located in the Plympton area of Plymouth and sits in the overflow car park currently used by the Chaplins Superstore, which is to the side of the site. The site is also bordered by Galileo Close, where the proposed entrance is to be, Stroad Road, and then the main train line sitting behind the site. For members' information, this proposed site is not allocated within a joint local plan for any particular form of development. The application is a proposal for a food retail store, of which the application's applicant is Aldi. The proposed store is proposed as you see in the site plan here to be set in the corner of the site, just behind the train line and adjacent to the Chaplins store. The proposed entrance is provided onto Galileo Close in the same location as the existing entrance point. Access to the site is provided from Galileo Close. The application also proposes a new roundabout between Galileo Close and Stroad Road. Going on to the detail of the application, members will see in the committee report that there's a summary of all the consultation responses which have been received on page 11. In total, we've received 82 letters of support, 38 objections and 11 neutral letters of representation. Just moving over onto the specifics of the proposals, officers consider that the landscaping proposed is acceptable in principle. However, there are opportunities that it could be improved, and as such it's recommended that a condition for the final landscaping scheme to be submitted through condition detail. It's equally the case that while the overarching layout is considered acceptable, it has been identified by the local highway authority that there is an opportunity that that car parking layout could be improved to provide greater pedestrian priority through it, and as such a condition is recommended to deal with those matters. And as I previously stated, the issues of landscaping and provision of trees which are outside the red line would need to be the subject matter of a 278 agreement, which would be for those elements to be implemented by the local highway authority, but that process would also require a maintenance contribution when it was entered into, so that the maintenance of those trees could be provided for. Just turning now more onto the specifics of the proposal. The store is proposed to be single-storey and is principally clad in a grey metal panelling, and the store will have a mono-pitch roof over the front of the store, which will present itself to Galileo Close, has a large glazed area, and there's additional glazing along the elevation which would front towards Stroad Road. Officers are satisfied with the design in its location and as proposed. Just moving on to the key matters. In terms of the implications of the proposal on the amenity of the surrounding area and residential properties, officers are satisfied that the proposals are acceptable, subject to a code of practice of construction which would be secured by condition, just to limit the impacts of those on the surrounding area through the construction process. In relation to low carbon matters, the proposal delivers a 20% reduction on building regulations within the building's footprint, and that will be secured via condition, and the application also proposes the use of photovoltaic cells on the roof to promote the use of renewable energy. In terms of drainage, the basic drainage strategy has been considered by the lead local flood authority and they're satisfied, but have required detailed conditions for the final details of that scheme to be submitted as part of condition discharges were the application to be approved. The two principal issues, which were reasons why the application would have been deferred last time, related to highways and retail matters, and I'll go through those in slightly more detail for you members now. In highways terms, from the submission of the application, there have been a number of concerns which officers in the local highway authority have raised, and these related to the amount of trip regeneration, the parking impacts, and the impact on the wider highway network. Following the identification of those issues, the applicant has provided additional information, including a car parking survey of the existing Chaplin store and also of a comparable store that that Aldi operate in the Southway area of the city. And as I say, following the last committee deferral, they provided additional information on the impacts on the highway network. In terms of car parking, officers are satisfied that the additional car parking secured through the Section 106 agreement to the front of Chaplin store, providing 68 spaces, would be sufficient. and that in relation to the Aldi store, the 118 provided would again be sufficient, and based on that car parking demand study from the Southway store, identified that it would in reality need approximately 86, but officers in the local highway authority believe the additional capacity will help deal with issues associated with the Chaplin store. In relation to the car parking, again, the proposed site plan only shows 4 car parking disabled spaces, whereas the local highway authority have recommended that should in fact be 12, and that's proposed to be dealt with via condition. In the letter of representation, the final letter of comment from the local highway authority, they'd recommended that there should be 4 electric car parking spaces provided. That's been discussed with the applicant and the local highway authority, and what's been secured and proposed by condition is that there will be 2 electric charging facilities provided, but a further 4 spaces would have the technical kit provided for them underground, and that were they to be required in the future, they could be brought into operation, and that would be a matter which would be dealt with by a sustainable travel plan for the proposed store. Subject to those matters, the Highways Authority and both the local planning authority are satisfied with the car parking provision to be provided. Following the updated traffic modelling has been provided, that's been considered by officers in the local highway authority, and what that identifies is that in future years after the store opening, there would, when added on to the additional background growth in trips on the network, a number of the junctions in the surrounding area would be slightly over their capacity. However, the local highway authority advised that modelling undertaken by the applicants is overly robust, and when considering the potential of this store to divert trips from other stores in the surrounding area, particularly from residents in the immediate vicinity, the proposal could actually lead to a reduction in the number of trips on the congested part of the Plymouth Road network. It's also, since the last planning committee, been negotiated with the applicants that they should make a £80,000 contribution to help mitigate those impacts in future years, and that would be directed to the Eastern Corridor Junction Improvement Programme, which the Council has established for the Plymouth Road area. That £80,000 provides the final element of funding which that scheme needs to commence, and that scheme, just for members' information, is due to commence in autumn of this year. Subject to those matters, the impacts on the highway network are considered acceptable. As identified in the addendum report, there is also a proposal via the conditions that, because of some of the concerns raised in the addendum report, that consultation should be undertaken for the bollard onto the Torbridge Road with associated signage, and also that a consultation should be undertaken for double yellow lines to be established whether they are desired by the local operators on Galileo Close. And as such, in relation to those matters subject to the conditions set out, officers are satisfied in Highways terms with the proposal.
In an ancient stunnery town, with programmes just for you, the Plympton Podcast.
The Silver Line, the 24-hour free helpline for older people. 0800 470 80 90.
Oh, I don't feel well. Maybe I should go home. No, but this meeting is too important. I don't want to let my boss down. But if I don't go home, it might get worse. And
if you don't want to take time off work, just pop out to the pharmacist, who may be able to provide you with over-the-counter medicine to help you feel better. As well as treating minor ailments, your local pharmacist can now offer a range of services, such as repeatable prescriptions and help with giving up smoking. NHS. Get the right treatment.
Change for Life is about small changes we can make to be healthier. For loads of ideas to cut back fat, watch the salt, make sugar swaps, or get your 5 a day, just search online for Change for Life.
Andrew Hill. Having considered the effect of the proposed new store on the highways infrastructure in the area, the council case officer then moved on to address the retail impact on neighbouring shopping areas such as Plympton's Ridgeway.
Turning now to the retail matters associated with the application, the fundamental concern with those relates to the joint local plans retail strategy which is set out in the JLP, and that seeks to focus retail and other town centre development into both the city centre principally, and then in the local area, the network of district and local centres. And in relation to this application in particular, that would focus in on the wider area of Plympton and the role that's fulfilled by the Ridgeway District Centre and the surrounding network of local centres. In ascertaining what implications this proposal will have on the acceptability in terms of that retail strategy, it's important to consider the national tests set out in the MPPF, which relate to the sequential test and the retail impact assessment. In terms of the sequential test, one has been provided by the applicant, which has been considered by officers. Officers are satisfied that there's a suitable degree of flexibility and appropriate range of sites have been considered, and as such, officers are satisfied that there are no more sequentially preferable sites that the development could be located in, i.e. those within the district and network of local centres within the catchment area. Turning now to the retail impact considerations, this, as I've already set out, was one of those matters of concern officers previously had, and that area of concern related to the fact that the existing evidence which the applicants had relied on was provided before the Lidl store had opened on the Plymouth Road, and officers were concerned to understand what the actual level of impact of the Lidl store, when considered alongside the one that's proposed now, would have. And that was why the updated household survey was provided. The applicants have provided that, and in their assessment, they've identified that they envisaged that the level of trade diversion from the existing co-op store in Ridgeway would be minus 3.3%, and that to the Iceland in the Ridgeway that would be 2.9%, with an overall impact on the convenience goods sector within the Plympton Ridgeway District Centre of 2.9%. That information was provided to officers, and they've consulted Alveston Young, who provide assistance to officers in relation to the specific retail considerations on the application. Alveston Young have raised a number of concerns, of which some of these are summarised in the officer report, about the methodology used by the applicant, and as such they've undertaken their own independent assessment. That estimates a slightly higher level of trade diversion, which is broadly similar to those identified by the Co-op in their letter of representation. And Alveston Young have advised officers that they believe the actual level of impact on the Co-op at Plympton Ridgeway would be 10.8%, and on the Iceland would be minus 6.05%, and that the overall level of impact on the convenience good would be minus 9.0%. They've also advised and officers agreed that the level of impact on the surrounding network of local centres would be acceptable. Obviously, officers at the previous planning committee had advised that they were concerned about the potential cumulative impacts with the proposed Lidl and Plymouth Road, and I can advise that Alveston Young have established that the proposed cumulative impact of those would be 14.4% on the Co-op, 9% on the Iceland, and going forward. Alveston Young have advised officers that in their professional viewpoint they believe that level of impact would be acceptable on the Ridgeway Centre, and officers have considered in detail all the letters of representations and the evidence provided by Alveston Young and also the applicant, and they are satisfied that that level of impact would be acceptable. That's not to say that it won't be negative, but the key test set out in the National Planning Policy Framework is whether the impact on the existing centres would be significantly adverse, and officers are satisfied that these proposals wouldn't result in that level of impact on the store. Having considered those two national tests, the consideration therefore reverts back to the retail strategy and principally what the proposed store impacts would have on the existing centres. In that regard, the key element of the joint local plan policy is that they seek to establish to strengthen the network of existing centres. Clearly, officers are of the viewpoint that this proposal wouldn't necessarily strengthen the network of centres because it's a proposed out-of-centre store. However, officers are satisfied that the impact of this proposal would not necessarily undermine the overarching strategy of the joint local plan in the wider city and also in this specific area of the city. As such, for those reasons, officers are now in a position where they'd like to recommend to members conditional approval of the application. That's subject to the signing of the Section 106 to secure the £80,000, plus a requirement on Aldi to provide the car parking layout in the Chaplain store and for chaplains to maintain that car parking in perpetuity. And it's also subject to the detailed conditions set out in the officer report, subject to the one amended condition set out in the addendum and also the new condition set out in the addendum report, but subject to that being changed from a prior to occupation condition to be a prior to commencement condition. Many thanks.
Once the council officer had set out the background and his recommendation, two other speakers addressed the committee. The first was a representative acting for the cooperative group, who were opposing the application.
Good afternoon to the Chair and members of the committee. My name is Katie Priest and I'm from Pegasus Planning Group. I'm here representing Cooperative Group to object to this proposal for Aldi. I'd like to confirm that a cooperative group only objects to schemes where there are real and material planning reasons to do so, and not on the basis of competition. Cooperatives support the policies in the adopted joint local plan, which has been adopted since this application was previously considered by the committee back in March. And these policies seek to protect the existing designated centres within the city. Co-op agrees with the Council's approach not to allocate sites for new retail provision in the local plan, following the evidence conclusion that no new convenience floor space is required prior to 2026. Cooperative consider that this planning application remains fundamentally contrary to your retail planning policies and harmful to the vitality and viability of nearby designated centres such as Ridgeway. The additional information provided by Aldi continues to overstate the proportions of trade that would be drawn from large supermarkets and grossly understates the amount of trade diversion from the designated local and district centres in Plympton, which are protected by your up-to-date policies. Given the policy position, it's crucial that members understand the impact of this proposal on the nearby designated centres. Cooperative Group operate convenience stores, including the one within Ridgeway District Centre, which is the designated district centre closest to the application site. The retail impact assessment for the Aldi application assumes that only 3.3% of its trade draw will come from this existing co-op, with the majority of trade draw assumed by Aldi to come from 3 large supermarkets, one of which is more than 8 kilometres away from the application site. Aldi's trade draw assumptions take almost no account for proximity of the site to Ridgeway District Centre and the impact on this designated centre, which is protected by your retail hierarchy and planning policies. This is a considerable underestimation by the applicant. Co-op's estimates of the impact on trade diversion to the proposed out-of-centre Aldi are 11%. The Council's own retail advisors have reviewed Aldi's evidence and have concluded that Aldi's evidence is incorrect. Their conclusions are that the impact on the co-op store will be approximately 10.87%, which corroborates co-op's assessment. This is a significant adverse impact of trade diversion away from the existing in-centre co-op to this out-of-centre Aldi, and is also a significant discrepancy in Aldi's retail impact figures. As well as being contrary to policy, this demonstrates that the proposed Aldi will have a negative impact on the district centre as a whole, including on other small retailers and service providers in Ridgeway District Centre, for significant loss of footfall to the co-op store, impacting harmfully on their viability. In fact, the reported 11% to the co-op and 14.4% overall to the district centre is considered a significant amount of trade draw to lose to one out-of-town retail centre, one that fundamentally harms the viability of this centre. The recommendation for approval does not consider that this trade diversion from an existing in-centre store will result in harm to the centre, despite being a clearly significant percentage and the proposal being contrary to policy. This fails to consider the vulnerability of the designated local and district centres to trade diversion, taking into account current difficult conditions in the high street generally and with the growth of internet shopping. The adopted policies support the existing centres and protect them, and as such this proposal is clearly contrary to policy, is demonstrably and significantly harmful to established traders within these centres.
Just for you, the Plympton Podcast.
Our second speaker is Mr. Williams. You two have 5 minutes. Would you like to be told when only one is left? Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is David Williams from Planning Potential, speaking on behalf of Aldi. At Planning Committee in March, members ultimately shared officers' views, could not make a positive decision on this application without further information on retail and highways impacts. We've listened to members' concerns, and following further discussions with officers, we've agreed to undertake this work. We're now very pleased that this has resulted in an officer recommendation for approval. The proposal has attracted strong local support, and a resolution to grant today would allow Aldi to deliver this investment in the city by the end of 2020. We would like to take this opportunity to briefly clarify some matters that were raised during determination. At the March Committee, members were concerned that granting planning permission would impact on the newly adopted development plan because the site is not allocated. National and local policy allows for new retail stores on unallocated sites where they meet the impact and sequential tests, which consider effects on local shopping centres within the catchment and the local context. The decision to approve this proposal will therefore have no bearing on the strength of the development plan or on future applications elsewhere in the city. The specific local context of Plympton includes large numbers of local residents who still make shopping trips to out-of-town superstores. The 2019 survey data indicates that almost £20 million a year, over 30% of convenience spending by Plympton residents, currently goes to Sainsbury's and Tesco superstores outside of the neighbourhood. Because of their one-stop shop offer, when shopping at these destinations, people are less inclined to visit the district centre. Despite this, the district centre is in good health. It's made up of over 90 premises offering a broad range of goods and services. The number of vacant premises is low compared to the national average, and the vacancies are reducing. Using new survey results, we have analysed Lidl's impact on the centre since opening in 2016. The impact is both low and very, very similar to that predicted when permission was granted in 2015. Aldi's similarly streamlined retail offer means that it too will compete with the larger stores, rather than the more specialist shops and top-up style stores within the Ridgeway Centre. If Aldi opens in Plympton as the closest major store to the Ridgeway, much more spending would be retained locally and spin-off benefits to local shops and services would be encouraged. We have arrived at a slightly different estimate of the likely impact on the Ridgeway's convenience trade than the Council's advisor, but such a debate among consultants is common, and in this case it should not detract from the clear judgment that both Aldi and the LPA's consultant say that there is unlikely to be a significant adverse impact on the Ridgeway. In addition, while much of the analysis has been focused on a small number of stores that sell food within the centre, including Co-op, it's important to remember that proposals should be judged on their impact on the centre as a whole, not on individual stores or centres. In reality, the overall impact on the centre would therefore be much less than the quoted figures, which are based on the convenience sector only. We have heard from Pegasus, who have submitted a series of objections to the proposal on behalf of Co-op. They raised similar concerns when Aldi proposed stores at Mutley Plain and in Southway. In neither case have these concerns materialised. The objections raised are at odds with the Co-op chief exec, Steve Morell's comments during the BBC interview in November. He said that Aldi and Lidl complement rather than compete with Co-op's top-up offer. No other retailers have objected to the proposal. Indeed, other local retailers such as Chaplin's and St Luke's Furniture Store see Aldi as a driver of local economic growth. Aldi have heard from local landowners who are looking to let vacant commercial units nearby, who are eager to benefit from the positive presence of Aldi. After further traffic analysis by the applicant, officers are now also content that the scheme is acceptable in highways terms, subject to the agreed conditions and obligations. These include the provision of a new roundabout and a pedestrian link on Strode Road, proposed enhancements to Galileo Close, and a contribution of £80,000 to the wider Eastern Corridor. Aldi understands that traffic and parking issues are particularly important for local people. In purely commercial terms, Aldi also need to be very confident, as they are here, that adequate parking capacity is available. If it's not, customers will simply shop elsewhere at stores with better facilities. Aldi have also recently been made aware of delivery vehicles using Torbridge Road to access Chaplin's. Aldi does not want its delivery vehicles to use this very narrow road, so the business is happy to agree to formally restrict use of this route via condition. Chaplin's has also written to confirm that they have instructed delivery drivers not to use this route and will also look to improve their servicing procedures independently. In conclusion, this proposal would make beneficial use of an underused brownfield site in a highly sustainable location. It will provide skilled jobs paid at the highest rate of any UK supermarket. It will help claw back trade from out-of-town superstores, encouraging more trips to local stores, and will deliver infrastructure improvements to the surrounding area. We therefore urge members to support officers' recommendation and grant permission and help to deliver this beneficial development as soon as possible. Thank you.
Planning Committee member Councillor Patrick Nicholson, who represents the St Mary ward in which the store would be built, welcomed some of the conditions the council were proposing for the development, but also had some concerns. He first spoke about the parts he welcomed.
So I'm very grateful for the slight change to the addendum report for a pre-commencement condition rather than a preoccupation for dealing with traffic issues in Galileo Close and Torbridge Road. I think members should be supporting that because it certainly will mitigate the potential impact on local residents. Equally, the 278 agreement will deal with some of the representations made in relation to Strode Road and concerns by putting a new roundabout in and suitable traffic restrictions of the potential highway impacts immediately from Galileo Close into Strode Road. So I welcome that as part of any potential approval. Having said that, there are a number of substantial issues, though, that I wouldn't mind exploring further. Firstly, in terms of the representations from the Pegasus Group and the officers' view in terms of significantly adverse impact from the retail policy. Now, I did ask this prior to the meeting, Chair, to officers and haven't really had a suitable response in terms of what certainly what experiences have taken place elsewhere of how you define significantly adverse impact. Because clearly we just had a significant contributor to the local retail community, the co-op, say there is an impact upon their store in Ridgeway that they believe if this is approved there will be a significant adverse impact. Yet we have officers who are not and advisors who are not in the trading environment, they're purely advisors saying that there isn't an adverse impact. So
I think we have officers to advise us. Can we leave it there?
Yeah, but we have advisors who have advised the council. Okay, so Alison Young have made representations.
I think we've got the question.
Right.
Could you advise?
Can I just finish putting my point, please?
No. I'm sorry. Once we start saying officers don't really know, I think we're on to a very,
I didn't say that. I said we've got two opinions.
Yeah.
Who are we as members to believe? We have a retailer who is represented by an expert today who's saying there's an adverse impact upon the trading position of an anchor store in the district centre, and yet we have Alison Young who are providing advice to officers of this authority, saying effectively that there is an impact, but the overall view from the local planning authorities is there isn't significantly adverse impact. So what I'm posing the question, which is for the committee to consider in the way they vote, is who are we to believe? Are we to believe a retailer who knows what the trading figures are of their store? And if it's adverse, why are we to disbelieve their view when they're the operators of the store? That, we have had reports in the past of developments in Plympton where the trading position of the co-op in Ridgeway has been marginal. So an adverse impact on a marginal business could see that business go to the wall.
Can we stick to this application?
Yeah, so equally,
I think we've got the question. Ali, can you take us through why the figure work that had been provided to us by our independent, non-biased advisors is what it is?
Certainly, Chair. The basis of the two comparisons, one provided by Planning Potential, one by Aldi Young, is based on an updated telephone survey which has been undertaken. That was commissioned by a separate independent organisation, and really the level of concern is about how that information has been interpreted. In relation to the work that Aldi Young have done, they've focused in the considerations in relation to the impact of the survey zone, which most closely relates to the Plympton area, but also the updated information which was collated from that study for the surrounding areas. They've applied those in what we believe to be a more robust approach in relation to that to formulate their answer. Obviously, the COP have their concerns which they've set out, and obviously, as acknowledged in the officer report, those are more similar to the level of the COP. Now, any given level of impact on any store is specific to the local considerations and the local area and what's taking place in that surrounding area. And as such, it's very difficult to draw a broad brush one-size-fits-all on the wider area. What I can say is officers have considered the impacts, as have Aldi Young. We do believe that while there is an adverse impact, that it isn't significantly adverse in that regard.
And what's Aldi Young's interest in this planning application?
They're the advisor to the local planning authority.
So they've got no interest in it going one way or the other,
no.
As far as we know. That's good to know.
Right, so thank you for the response through you, Chair, from officers, but I would beg to disagree with that view in the sense of when you look at the impact, you're talking about £730,000 a year from the co-op. You're talking Iceland around 200k. And what's quite interesting, although it's not the district centre, from Lidl, it's £4.5 million a year of lost business. So when we talk about job creation, I think it'd be interesting for members to explore what job losses we might see as a result of any potential approval. So there's
Ali? There's a question about potential job losses.
Observation, really.
Well. Could we stick to questions to the officers, please?
Chair, if I wish to make comment around a question, I think that's local democracy.
Okay, Margaret was next.
Chair, I thought you wanted the officers to answer that particular question. I haven't actually finished what I was asking.
Well, if we could stick to questions, because we are tending to go on a little bit.
Well,
Chair,
it is a substantial planning application affecting a substantial part of the city and warrants a reasonable level of democratic debate. In relation to highway improvements, could I ask a question of the officers?
Please do.
In relation to the £80,000 contribution to the Eastern Corridor Junction Improvement Scheme along Plymouth Road, what direct benefit to the highway infrastructure around Glen Road would the £80,000 contribute? Because the Plymouth Road Junction Improvement Scheme stops effectively where St Mary's Bridge meets Glen Road. So in terms of the potential congestion that's forecast in Moorland Road, Glen Road, and in that immediate vicinity, is there any potential benefits from that £80,000 going in that vicinity? And are there any proposed schemes?
Chair, if I can start the answer to that, but there may be a colleague over my shoulder who may want to add further information there on behalf of the local highway authority. Obviously, the road network going into Plympton is relatively constrained, and there are only a limited number of entrances going into that. The Plymouth Road is a particularly congested element of that, and the Eastern Corridor Junction Scheme seeks to alleviate a number of concerns on there, and basically to try and increase the free flow of traffic along that route and the other routes which stems off to it, including that which goes past this store. So the hope and the aim of that scheme by the council is that it allows vehicles to move along that entire route in a more free-flowing manner. Of that, obviously, in relation to this application, people won't just potentially visit this Aldi store from the immediate vicinity, but from the wider area which will be utilising that route, and as such should be those benefits to those people travelling along those roads there. And so this was, in relation to schemes which the council has in its kind of strategy for improving the road network, the Eastern Corridor scheme is the principal one to benefit the wider Plympton area, and as such officers believe that this was the most appropriate direction of those funds. It's also the case that the proposed roundabout between Galileo Close and Strode would potentially help deliver additional improvements in there for vehicles exiting that area. I don't know whether the local highway authority had any additional comments.
Yeah, just to clarify, Chair, in terms of the Eastern Corridor Junction Improvement Scheme, the scheme of improvements, as Councillor Nicholson has rightly highlighted, doesn't go as far as Glen Road. However, the Plymouth Road corridor actually operates as one strategic corridor. So by helping to provide improvements to the operation of lights and junctions further along the corridor, you'll actually find that you'll get a continual improvement along the entire corridor, because you'll find that traffic is arriving at a much more a gradual position rather than it actually coming in platoons, what currently happens. So as you get a change of lights, you get a whole wave of traffic coming through. And that will then, like I say, undertaking those improvements will help improve the operation of the corridor along its entire length. It's also worth noting, in terms of the points raised, in terms of the congestion at Glen Road, Strode Road junctions, the applicant's transport assessment is overly robust. They've only taken into account diversion of existing trips of 25%. Therefore, they've actually modelled a traffic impact of 75% of the trips being new. In reality, and research has shown that new food stores generate far less in terms of new trips. And certainly the TRICS research paper undertaken several years ago identified that a new store could generate as little as 10% new traffic, because it's basically resulting in people diverting from existing stores.
Thank you very much for that. Just in considering the fact that the Eastern Corridor Junction Improvement Scheme doesn't go as far as Glen Road, now that there's additional contribution, in the event that, say, the bus stop outside the Lord Louis pub could be better located to facilitate the free flow of traffic, would that in principle be something that could be included in that overall improvement scheme?
At the moment, I couldn't confirm either way. It's just certainly something we could take back to colleagues. But at the moment, like I say, the scheme does just include the junctions which are identified currently as part and parcel of the programme. But if there are any further concerns, then we can certainly take them back. But I certainly couldn't turn around and say that we could include them at this time.
After a number of points and questions raised by other members of the committee, the application was put to the vote and was passed by 7 votes to 6, with members voting along party lines and the majority Labour members on the committee carrying the vote by a majority of 1. So, permission for the store having now been given, Aldi hope to have it up and running by the end of 2020. And that ends this special edition of the Plympton Podcast. Theme music has been provided by audionautics.com.
Podcast.